Hey YouTube, wanted to give you a little different video today. I want to go over kidding and weaning rates and how those metrics, those definitions apply to my operation over the course of 4 years since I've started raising goats. So straight away, I just want to talk about some definitions and what they mean for my operation. None of what I'm going to tell you today is necessarily etched in stone or the right way or the wrong way. It's just what it means to me and my operation right now. So to start out with, kidding rate and weaning rate. So I think it's very important that people know there is a difference between those two things. I'm sure some folks this is very obvious and this will be too basic, but kidding rate, that is number of live kids at birth, okay, in a ratio to exposed females in the fall. And kidding rate is something that doesn't really apply to my operation very much. Because we kid out in pasture, we have fairly brushy pastures. It's kind of some extensive management. We're not in there. We don't assist with birthing or anything like that. So I can't really even track my kidding rate very well. I don't truly know it. So that's something that doesn't apply to me, but I think it's important to go over what it means to me and take note that it is different than the weaning rate. And the weaning rate is simply those number of kid goats at weaning, which for us is roughly 6 months of age or 7 months of age. It'll be different for other folks, but at time of weaning to the number of exposed females in the fall. And that's another important aspect to this number of exposed females in the fall. For me, that's not the number of females that make it to the start of kidding. So if we had some females that died through the winter or something like that, they still count. It's the number that were exposed to billies when you turn billies out back in the fall to the number of those kid goats that you have at weaning. It's not we're not talking about ultrasounding and pulling out some opens just before we start kidding and taking them to the sale barn, and so we eliminate those. No, those go into this equation for me. So anything that like I say gets a billy turned out on it in the fall is going to be in this equation and factor in to that for me. So I think that's important. Some people they don't factor those animals in if they have some deaths or if they remove some animals just prior to kidding that were open on an ultrasound or just look not bred. They don't apply that, but I think it's important that you do because that's really what truly matters as far as the economics go. Additionally, I want to talk about some definitions on what a nanny kid is. For me, a nanny kid is anything from birth to 7 months old, which in our case, for our operation, that's roughly when those billies are going to get turned out. So like I say, that's the definition of a nanny kid for me. The next thing, a yearling nanny. That's kind of a little bit of a gray area, but I call that yearling nanny is a 7 month to 18 month old female goat, which also happens to be from the time I turn a billy in on her for the first time, so her first breeding, all the way until you turn the billy out on her for her second time. And then at that point in time, she becomes what I consider a nanny, which is roughly an 18 month or older goat, female goat. So like I say, as soon as you turn that billy out on her for the second time, that for me is when I start considering her a nanny. So the only reason all that matters is just in communicating from one person to another well, that's a yearling nanny, or that's a nanny kid, or that's a nanny. It just gives you perspective as to where you're at in that animal's lifespan. So moving on, I made this simple chart here that just has a few metrics in it to highlight what went on for us. we bought goats back in May of 2017. That was the first goats that we owned. We really didn't know much of anything, and it's been a learning curve ever since. But starting from that point, we turned Billies out that fall, May of 2017, and then in 2018 we had our first kid crop. Our weaning rate for that kid crop was 100%. We only had 30 nannies that we turned Billies out on in the fall. We didn't have any yearling nannies, and the kidding started February 15th of 2018. Now, part of why this weaning rate was so low for that year was due to this kidding date. We kidded too early. We turned our Billies out too early, and we ended up kidding out too early for our part of the world. North Texas, you can certainly have winter storms in late February and early March, and that's exactly what happened to us. We had some winter storms right there the second or third or fourth week of February, and we suffered a lot of dead kids due to that, being kidding out in a pasture setting and not having any kind of infrastructure to deal with that. So that certainly affected that weaning rate right there. Moving on to 2019, we did 150%. So that's pretty darn good. We had 30 nannies. We had 15 of the yearling nannies that it was their first time to kid out. We bumped our kidding date back to March 15th, so we bypassed all those winter storms and that tough weather to have a kid goat born out into. So that was obviously a good year. At the end of that year, we thought maybe we had some things figured out, ironed out, that we were headed in the right direction. And for us, we knew we wanted to get bigger, so we scaled up. End of 2019, that fall, we purchased about 225 yearling nannies from another operation, 7-month-old nannies. And that fall, we brought them to our house or our operation, turned them out with our other goats that we already had purchased, turned Billies out on them, and that fall, and then come around to 2020, the spring, we ended up with a 55% kid crop. We started kidding the same time as the year before, but we had a significantly lower kid crop. We attribute that primarily to this high number of yearling nannies. That was roughly 85% of our herd at the time. The yearling nannies, they're not as good as mothers. They're not as developed. Everything's kind of stacked against them. Additionally, we had some birthing issues. We had some bigger Billies, too big of Billies, in my opinion, turned out on them. Billies that were built really wide in the shoulder. And we had some kidding issues from that. So we on top of not being good mothers, those nanny kids, they just weren't developed enough for those larger Billies, and we had some death loss just on those yearling nannies themselves. But that was quite the learning experience. We also what's different here is a much larger group of animals. We kidded out and still in one herd like we had the prior 2 years. And I think that potentially that has something to do with it. Since that time, we've researched and learned more and realized that smaller groups are better for these animals. A lot of these guys that are running sheep, or maybe they're running large numbers of goats, they're doing a lot of handling, jugging these animals up in single units and letting those kid goats get bonded to them sometimes. So the smaller units show a lot of positivity to them. But that was 2020. Moving on, 2021, or this year when we kidded out, did a lot better. We had the 90% weaning rate. We had just 136 adult nannies and 75 yearling nannies. So what ended up happening, we called, right, wrong, or indifferent, a lot of these yearling nannies that didn't have a kid or didn't wean a kid. We pulled them off and we turned them into cash. And so we had a smaller group of animals here, not by a lot. I think it comes out to 210 total female animals. We still kidded them all together in one group. So this change from 55 to 90 in our weaning rate, we attribute that to the much higher adult nannies, seeing that they're the better mothers. They care for those kids better. They stick to them better. They're overall just a better animal. Additionally, for this 2021 kidding season, over the winter from 2020 to 2021, we did supplement those goats more. We upped our protein rate that we put out for those animals. We don't put out any kind of forage, but we will supplement with some protein in the form of a 20% breeder cube is what it is. But I say that because in 2021 we had 4 sets of triplets, and prior to 2021 we had no more than 1 set of triplets any of these years, and we never had any of them survive. And in 2021, 3 of those 4 sets of triplets, all the triplets survived. So it indicated to me that increasing that nutrition got us some more multiple births, promoted the fertility in those animals, and for not a whole lot of extra dollars spent on the feed. And so made me a little bit more convinced that adding some more supplemental feed to these goats can pay for itself. I've been told that by other people that have done this longer and to a much larger scale than myself. But in my own operation, I witnessed it in this year. So that's just kind of a synopsis on these years. I hope that it can kind of demonstrate the change that we've experienced. Another thing to back up just a little bit, in year 3 here, when we purchased this big group of yearling nannies and turned them out, we turned them out the exact same day that we turned Billy's out. So we went and purchased those animals, brought them home, and turned them and the Billies out into our pasture the same day. So what I'm trying to get at with that was, back up again. So we turned those yearling nannies out, okay, and because all my operation is based on the 2 strands of polywire fence, I didn't get those yearlings broke when we turned them out before we turned them out. And so I had a lot of fencing issues for the first 60 days that they were on our place, of these yearling nannies getting out and traveling around and having to go and get them and put them back in. And I actually think that contributed to probably a poor breed up on those animals, because we turned those Billies out for just 60 days. And so that entire period of time I was having these fencing issues, to where I think that could have contributed a little bit to our eventually our poor weaning rate, but via a poor conception rate. So that I have no way of truly knowing that, but that is an opinion that I hold for year 3. Moving on to year 4 here in 2021, we had significantly more of these older nannies, but we still we improved, but we didn't improve that dramatically on our weaning rates. One thing I think happened there, we realized the importance of stockmanship in moving these animals to a fresh paddock during kidding. And basically what it amounts to is that you can't move these animals during kidding. This year, this 2021, we waited until 4 weeks after the start date of kidding before we moved pastures with these animals. And I thought I was okay to do that. But I think we still had too many young kids. And when we did it in such a way that I think we caused too much commotion, too much confusion, and those things lead to orphaning. They lead to problems. They stress that bond between the mother and those kids, and the bond between a nanny and her kid goat already isn't very good relative to a cow or maybe even some sheep out there. So I think that was a mistake that we made in handling that herd during those first 6 weeks of kidding, that if we could go back and redo that, we would hold those animals longer in the pasture before we ever really moved them. I think that maybe that number is 6 weeks from start of kidding. Maybe it's even closer to 8 weeks. But then we get into some other issues of our grass and having enough forage, and do we hurt the land by keeping them in a smallish area too long, whatever. But that's kind of another video. But I do think that that was an issue that maybe led to a lower weaning rate than what we should have experienced by having so many more of these older nannies. So in conclusion, I think it's pretty obvious that every year is different, and of course, like with everything, every operation is different. So these numbers, they're not necessarily going to be something that you can set your watch to or really depend on if you're getting started with goats and think, well, it's going to maybe go just like this for me. But what I do think tonight, what we did was, by going through these years and talking about everything and talking about the management practices that we changed from year to year, it brought to light the different principles that are true for some improvements and just going through this, and I think it showed some things that you can depend on that are gonna be a positive effect on your operation. So I like to say, I hope this video helps somebody. Hope you guys can at least walk away with something useful from it for your operation, and look forward to making the next one. Talk to you later. Bye now.